the Ship of Theseus. You are standing at the edge of a great harbor, watching as the legendary Ship of Theseus floats before you. Its wooden hull gleams in the sunlight, its sails billow in the wind. This ship has sailed through storms, carried warriors across vast seas, and survived the wear and tear of time. But there's a problem. Over the years, piece by piece, every plank, every mast, every nail has been replaced. Not a single original part remains. And now, you ask yourself, is this still the same Ship of Theseus, or is it something entirely new? At first, the answer seems obvious. Of course, it's still the Ship of Theseus. It has the same name, the same design, and has sailed under the same banner for generations. But then the question starts to haunt you. If every part has been changed, what exactly makes it the same ship? Is identity tied to physical components, or is there something deeper, something beyond wood and nails? And here's where things get even stranger. Imagine that a meticulous shipwright has been collecting the discarded planks and beams from the original ship. Over time, they reconstruct the entire vessel from the old parts. Now, there are two ships, one built gradually through replacement, the other rebuilt entirely from the original materials. Which one is the real Ship of Theseus? The one that has maintained continuity through its voyages, or the one made of the exact pieces that once sailed across history? This is where your mind starts to twist. If you say the continuously maintained ship is the real one, then material parts don't define identity. But if you say the reconstructed one is the real Ship of Theseus, then at what point did the first one stop being itself? When the first plank was replaced? The 10th? The last question mark. It's not just a question about ships, it's about you. Think about yourself. Your body is constantly changing. Cells die and regenerate. Every 7 to 10 years, nearly every cell in your body has been replaced. You are not physically the same person you were a decade ago, but are you still you? If you woke up tomorrow with an artificial heart, would you still be yourself? What if, piece by piece, every organ was replaced? At what point would you stop being the person you are now? And it doesn't stop with the body. Your thoughts, your memories, your personality, these too evolve. The beliefs you held years ago may no longer define you. You've learned, changed, adapted. Are you still the same person who made mistakes in the past, or have you become someone new? The Ship of Theseus doesn't just challenge the identity of a vessel, it forces you to question the very essence of what makes you you. Now step beyond yourself. Consider nations, traditions, institutions. A country may keep the same name, but its people, its values, its leaders change. Is it still the same nation? A family passes down its legacy, but each generation is different from the last. A friendship evolves. At what point does it become something unrecognizable from what it once was? And perhaps the most unsettling thought, if identity is fluid, if something can change entirely and still be considered the same, then what does it truly mean to be anything at all? Maybe identity isn't about physical continuity or even mental consistency, but rather a story we tell ourselves, an illusion of permanence in a world where everything is always shifting. So you stand there at the harbor, staring at the Ship of Theseus, knowing that there is no single, absolute answer, because maybe the real paradox isn't whether the ship is still the same. Maybe the real paradox is your desperate need for things to stay the same at all. Zeno's paradoxes. You are standing at the starting line, watching Achilles, the greatest warrior of Greece, prepare to race against a slow-moving tortoise. The rules are simple. The tortoise gets a head start. Achilles, far faster, will surely overtake it in seconds. You brace yourself, waiting for the inevitable. But as Achilles takes his first step, something strange happens. Before he can reach the tortoise, he must first reach the spot where the tortoise started. And by the time he gets there, the tortoise has moved a little farther ahead. Achilles pushes forward again, but before reaching the tortoise's new position, he must reach the halfway point of that distance, then halfway again, and again. You realize the race is no longer just about speed. It has become a battle against infinity itself. Each time Achilles moves, there is always another fraction of distance to close. The process never ends. Every step he takes is divided into smaller and smaller halves, stretching endlessly into an infinite sequence of checkpoints he must reach. And suddenly, your mind locks up. If there are an infinite number of steps Achilles must take to reach the tortoise, how can he ever overtake it? How can he even move at all? This is Zeno's paradox, and it has haunted thinkers for centuries. It tells you that motion, something you take for granted, is an illusion built on impossible logic. If everything can be divided into smaller and smaller parts, then crossing even the smallest distance requires completing an infinite number of steps. And if an infinite process can never be fully completed, then Achilles should never catch the tortoise. Worse, he should never even take the first step. Yet, in the real world, he does. Every day, you watch runners overtake slower ones. You move effortlessly from one place to another. The paradox shouldn't hold, and yet, logically, it seems unbreakable. But Zeno didn't stop at Achilles and the tortoise. He pushed even further. Imagine an arrow shot from a bow, slicing through the air. At any given instant, the arrow must be in one exact position. If you freeze time, the arrow is still frozen in place. Now imagine that every moment in time is just a collection of these frozen instants. If, in every instant, the arrow is motionless, then how does it ever move at all? If every frame of reality is still, what creates the illusion of motion? And now, your sense of reality starts to unravel. Zeno's paradoxes aren't just about Achilles or arrows. They're about time itself, about how you perceive the world. If reality can be divided into infinite moments, is time truly flowing, or are you simply experiencing an illusion of movement from one frozen frame to the next? Mathematicians tried to dismantle Zeno's paradoxes for centuries. The answer, they say, lies in calculus and the concept of limits. Even though there are infinite steps, their total sum converges to a finite number. Achilles does catch the tortoise. The arrow does reach its target. Motion is real, but it obeys mathematical laws that the human mind struggles to comprehend. And yet, even knowing this, the paradox lingers, because Zeno was never just questioning math. He was questioning the very nature of perception. If your senses deceive you about motion, what else do they mislead you about? If something as simple as walking forward can be deconstructed into infinite impossibilities, how much of your reality is built on assumptions you never even think to question? So you stand there, watching Achilles race forward, knowing full well that in the real world he will catch the tortoise. But deep down, in the cold logic of infinity, you see the trap Zeno laid before you. And once you see it, you can never unsee it. The Sorites Paradox. You stand before a massive pile of sand, golden grains cascading down its sides, a perfect mound resting under the weight of its own simplicity. It's a heap, a pile, there's no doubt about it. But then, you reach down and remove a single grain. It's still a heap. You remove another grain, and another. The pile looks unchanged, still towering, still unmistakably a heap. But you keep going, removing one grain at a time, slowly, methodically. With each grain that falls away, nothing seems to change, until at some point, something does. At some point, the heap is gone. And now, your mind begins to spin. When did it stop being a heap? Was it after 100 grains, 1,000? Or was there one precise moment, one single grain, that transformed the pile from something into nothing? The problem is, you can't pinpoint it. No single grain made the difference. No individual removal was enough to erase the heap. And yet, by a process of tiny, almost imperceptible steps, the heap has disappeared. This is the Sorites Paradox, and it exposes a terrifying truth. Reality does not grant you clear boundaries. This isn't just a problem about sand. It's about everything. When does a child become an adult? When does a few strands of gray hair make you old? When does losing money make you poor? At what moment does life fade into death? You see, language and logic demand clarity, but the world refuses to give it. You want things to be defined, to have clear labels, but so much of life exists in a hazy in-between where things shift so gradually that you can't recognize the moment of transformation. The Sorites Paradox forces you to confront the terrifying possibility that many of the categories you rely on, youth, wealth, health, identity, are not as solid as you think. Now, take the paradox one step further. Suppose you start adding grains of sand, one by one. A single grain is not a heap. 2 grains are not a heap. 10, 100, 1,000. At what moment does it become one? Again, you cannot say. This is the trap. If no single grain ever turns a non-heap into a heap, then logically, even 1,000,000 grains should still not be a heap, and yet, there it is before you, undeniable and real. So what do you trust? Logic or perception? Philosophers have wrestled with this question for centuries. Some argue that words like heap are vague by nature, that language itself is a crude tool trying to carve certainty into an uncertain world. Others attempt to impose artificial thresholds. Maybe 10,000 grains make a heap, but 9,999 do not. But does that truly answer the question, or does it just sweep the paradox under the rug? And what about you? If every cell in your body is replaced over time, are you still the same person? If your personality shifts in subtle ways year after year, at what point do you become someone else entirely? If you let go of a little dream, a little hope, a little piece of yourself, one by one, do you ever notice the moment when you are no longer the person you used to be? The Sorites Paradox is not just about heaps of sand. It's about the way change happens, slowly, invisibly, until one day you wake up and everything is different. You never saw the moment it happened, and that, perhaps, is the most unsettling truth of all. The Barber Paradox. You walk into a small village where everything seems ordinary: cobblestone streets, wooden houses, people going about their day. But then you hear whispers about a peculiar rule that governs the town. There is only one barber, and he follows a strict policy. He shaves all those who do not shave themselves, and only those who do not shave themselves. At first, this seems like a simple rule, a neat system where every man in town gets exactly the right amount of shaving. But then your mind catches on something. A question forms, sharp as a razor blade. Who shaves the barber? If he shaves himself, then by definition, he must not shave himself, because he only shaves those who do not shave themselves. But if he does not shave himself, then by definition, he must shave himself, because he shaves all those who do not shave themselves. He cannot shave himself, and yet he must. He cannot not shave himself, and yet he mustn't. Your brain short-circuits. The logic folds in on itself like a snake devouring its own tail. You've stumbled into a paradox, an inescapable loop where both possibilities contradict each other. There is no solution, only a question that refuses to be answered. And now, you start to see the deeper implications. The Barber Paradox isn't just about shaving. It's about the dangers of self-referential rules, about systems that crumble under the weight of their own logic. It's about contradiction hiding in the places you least expect. Think of laws that try to define themselves. This statement is false. If it's true, then it must be false. If it's false, then it must be true. The paradox infects logic itself, creating statements that should have meaning but collapse under scrutiny. Or think about bureaucracy, rules made to regulate other rules. legal systems so tangled in contradictions that they cannot function. What happens when a government says, all rules must follow this rule, but then the rule contradicts itself? You've seen it before. Policies that cancel each other out, loopholes that make enforcement impossible. The Barber Paradox isn't just an oddity, it's a warning. And what about you? Have you ever trapped yourself in a self-referential paradox? Ever told yourself, I should always be spontaneous, only to realize that planning to be spontaneous is itself a contradiction? Ever tried to be confident by forcing confidence, only to realize that true confidence cannot be forced? Ever set a rule for yourself that collapses the moment you try to follow it? The Barber Paradox exposes the fragility of rigid systems. It reminds you that not all rules can be absolute, that sometimes the very structure you build to create order will turn on itself and leave you standing in a void of logical contradiction. So, you stand there in the village, staring at the barber's shop, knowing he can never exist, and yet, in your own life, in society, in the very way the world is structured, you see his paradox everywhere. The barber may be an illusion, but his dilemma is all too real. The Omnipotence Paradox. You stand before an all-powerful being, a force so absolute that nothing is beyond its control. It creates galaxies with a thought, bends reality to its will, and reshapes existence with effortless command. There is no limit to what it can do until you ask a single devastating question. Can this being create a rock so heavy that even it cannot lift it? For a moment, the universe seems to hold its breath, because no matter how this question is answered, something impossible happens. If the being can create such a rock, then there is something it cannot do. It cannot lift it. But if the being cannot create the rock, then there is still something it cannot do. It cannot create the unliftable. Either way, there is something beyond its power. And just like that, omnipotence shatters. You have trapped an infinite force in a paradox of its own making, a contradiction so fundamental that it undermines the very concept of unlimited power. Omnipotence, by definition, means the ability to do anything. But if it can do anything, then it must be able to create limits. And if it can create limits, then it is not truly unlimited. The paradox doesn't stop with divine power. It exposes the contradictions lurking beneath any idea of absolute control. Imagine a ruler who has total authority over a nation. If they truly have unlimited power, they should be able to impose a law that no one, including themselves, can break. But if such a law exists, then their power is no longer absolute. True omnipotence would require the ability to both create and destroy limitations simultaneously, a logical impossibility. And now the paradox turns toward you. Have you ever wished for complete control over your life? To be free of all obstacles, all uncertainty, all resistance? If you had such power, could you impose a rule upon yourself that you could never break? And if you could, would you still be free, or would you become imprisoned by your own command? This is the hidden weight of omnipotence, not just the ability to do anything, but the burden of contradiction that comes with it. You crave freedom, but absolute freedom would mean the ability to surrender it. You desire certainty, but to be truly all-knowing, you would also need the ability to unknow, to let go of what is fixed. True power, the paradox suggests, is inherently self-defeating, and so you stare at the rock, this impossible weight that should not exist. If it is created, power is lost. If it is not, power is incomplete. The all-powerful being does not answer. Perhaps it understands something you do not. That true power is not in doing everything, but in understanding what must never be done. Perhaps the ultimate paradox of omnipotence is that the greatest power of all is restraint, the paradox of the liar. You hear the words, simple yet lethal, I am lying. For a moment, they seem harmless, just another statement in an ocean of conversations. But then something shifts. A crack appears in reality. Because if the statement is true, then the person must be lying. But if they are lying, then their statement must be false, which would mean they are actually telling the truth. Your mind locks up. It's a loop, an impossible contradiction folding in on itself, like a snake eating its own tail. You search for a way out. Maybe it's a trick. Maybe the person thinks they are lying but isn't. But no, the statement is clear. I am lying. If it's true, it must be false. If it's false, it must be true. And now, something even more unsettling dawns on you. This paradox isn't just a linguistic game. It's an infection that spreads into logic itself. If truth and falsehood can collapse like this, what does that mean for everything else you believe to be certain? You've just stepped into one of the oldest and most devastating paradoxes of all time. Philosophers have fought over it for centuries. Some have tried to dismiss it as meaningless, an error of language. But that doesn't erase the problem, it just shifts it. Because what if all truth depends on statements? And what if some statements, like this one, break the very foundation of what truth means? And then, another thought grips you. Have you ever told a lie so often that it became truth in your mind? Or spoken the truth in a way that still misled others? Have you ever lived in a contradiction where what you say and what you feel are irreconcilable? The liar's paradox isn't just a problem for philosophers. It's a problem for you. It's in the stories you tell yourself, the masks you wear, the way reality bends under the weight of perception. It's in politics, where words can twist into weapons. It's in media, where truth and deception blur until no one can tell the difference. It's in the human mind, where memories reshape themselves, where what was once false can feel true through sheer repetition. And if truth and lies can tangle like this, what does that say about certainty itself? So you stand there, staring at the contradiction, knowing it cannot be resolved. The words still hang in the air. I am lying. And as they do, the world tilts just slightly, because now you understand the horrifying truth. Sometimes there is no truth at all. The unexpected hanging paradox. You sit in a cold, dimly lit prison cell, heart pounding as the warden delivers the sentence. You will be executed at noon on one day next week, but the exact day will be a surprise. You will not see it coming. A chill runs down your spine, but then your mind starts working. A paradox has just been placed in front of you, and you can't resist trying to escape through logic. You begin by thinking about Friday, the last possible day. If by Thursday night you're still alive, then the execution must happen on Friday. But if you know it's happening on Friday, then it's not a surprise, so it can't be Friday. Now you move to Thursday. But if Friday is eliminated, then Thursday becomes the last possible day. And if you're still alive by Wednesday night, then you'll know it must happen Thursday. But that wouldn't be unexpected either, so it can't be Thursday. One by one, you eliminate every day of the week. Wednesday, Tuesday, Monday, each collapses under the same logic. By the end of your reasoning, you conclude that the execution cannot happen at all. The warden's statement is impossible. You smile to yourself, feeling the weight lift off your shoulders. And then, on Wednesday at noon, the guards enter your cell. Shock floods through you as they pull you to your feet. This isn't possible. You proved that the execution couldn't happen. And yet, here you are, completely and utterly surprised. This is the unexpected hanging paradox, a perfect trap of logic that dismantles itself the moment you believe you've solved it. You thought reason could shield you, but paradoxically, your reasoning is exactly what made the surprise possible. Because you eliminated the possibility of an execution, you stopped expecting it, And that, in the cruelest twist, is exactly why you didn't see it coming. This paradox doesn't just toy with prisoners, it breaks fundamental assumptions about logic, knowledge, and prediction. It tells you that certainty is not always possible, that trying to outthink reality can sometimes lead you straight into its jaws. But what if this paradox isn't just about an execution? What if it's about your own life? Have you ever tried to predict the exact moment something life-changing would happen, only for it to blindside you anyway? Have you ever been so certain about the future that you ignored the possibility of being wrong? Think about disaster. You convince yourself that everything is fine, that misfortune is far away, that it can't happen to you. And then one day, out of nowhere, life rips the ground from under you. You're stunned, though deep down, you realize the signs were always there. Or think about happiness. You chase it, expecting it to arrive on a set schedule, when you get the job, when you meet the right person, when the conditions are just right. But when it finally reaches you, it's never in the way you expected. It sneaks up on you in the quiet moments, in the places you weren't looking. The unexpected hanging paradox is not just a problem of logic, it's a problem of life itself. It shows you that not everything can be neatly calculated, that some truths only exist in the act of unfolding. So you sit in the prison cell, bound by your own assumptions. The executioner walks in, and as they place the noose around your neck, you can't help but laugh, because for the first time, you understand the real paradox. You thought knowing the future would protect you from it, but the moment you knew it wouldn't happen was the very moment it did. The Bootstrap Paradox. You hold an old, worn-out book in your hands. Its pages are yellowed with time, the ink faded, but legible. It is a book of brilliant scientific discoveries, formulas decades ahead of their time. You found it in an old attic, hidden in a dusty chest. The author's name? Your own. But here's the problem. You haven't written it yet. Determined to solve this mystery, you carefully copy down every word, every equation, and years later, when the time is right, you publish it. The book becomes legendary. It changes the world. And eventually, after a long life of accolades and success, you grow old, knowing your work is done. You place the original book into the same chest in the attic, waiting for your younger self to find it. Now stop and think. Where did the book actually come from? You never created it. You simply copied it. The knowledge contained in it was never invented, never discovered. It was passed through time in an infinite loop with no beginning. This is the Bootstrap Paradox, and it tears apart everything you thought you knew about cause and effect. An object, an idea, a piece of information loops through time, existing without ever truly being created. No origin, no first step, just an endless cycle. And now you start seeing it everywhere. A musician learns a famous song after hearing it performed by an older artist. Later in life, they perform it themselves, and a young version of that same artist hears it, only to repeat the process in the future. Who wrote the song? A scientist receives a blueprint from the future, uses it to build a machine, and later, the machine is sent back in time to give them the same blueprint. Who designed it? The paradox gets its name from the idea of pulling yourself up by your own bootstraps, an impossible act of self-creation, a closed time loop, a self-contained cycle where something exists simply because it always has. And now, an even darker thought creeps in. What if this applies not just to objects, but to ideas? What if entire beliefs, cultures, even identities are built on concepts that have no true origin? What if something you believe to be fundamental, some great truth you live by, was never actually created, but merely passed from person to person, repeating endlessly with no original source? Think of traditions that have been followed for generations, yet no one remembers why they started. Think of stories that exist simply because they have always been told. How much of what you know is simply an idea that has been handed down, looping through time, unquestioned? The Bootstrap Paradox is more than a time travel puzzle. It is a haunting reminder that not everything has a beginning. Some things simply are. And so, you stare at the book in your hands, feeling the weight of a paradox that cannot be resolved. You will write it because you have already written it. It exists because it always has. And now, you are trapped in the loop, just like everything else. The paradox of the raven. You are sitting in a quiet field, watching the sky as a black raven soars overhead. It lands on a nearby branch, caws once, and watches you with dark, unblinking eyes. You remember a simple logical statement: all ravens are black. Seems obvious, doesn't it? Every raven you've ever seen is black. It's a rule of nature, a truth so fundamental you don't even question it. But then, you hear something strange, an argument that shouldn't make sense but somehow does. If the statement, all ravens are black, is true, then logically, its opposite must also be true. Everything that is not black is not a raven. And now, something unsettling happens. You look down and see a red apple resting beside you. The apple is not black. The apple is not a raven. This is also true. And by some twisted trick of logic, you have just confirmed the original statement: all ravens are black. Your mind stumbles. How can this be? How can the existence of a red apple have anything to do with the color of ravens? Shouldn't only black ravens confirm the statement, not random objects that have nothing to do with birds? Yet, logically, both statements are identical. This is the paradox of the raven, a problem first proposed by philosopher Carl Gustav Hempel. It exposes a flaw, maybe even an absurdity, hidden within the way logic and reasoning are supposed to work. You feel your grip on certainty slipping. Because if this paradox is true, then every non-black object in the universe, the blue sky, a white shirt, a green leaf, somehow serves as evidence that ravens are black. A cup of coffee, a silver coin, an orange cat, each one, by not being a raven, is confirming something about birds you've never even seen. And now you see the deeper problem. Science, knowledge, truth, so much of what you believe relies on observation. You confirm things by testing them, by gathering evidence. But if every object that isn't black can confirm something about ravens, then how much of your knowledge is built on faulty reasoning? How often have you believed something simply because nothing has disproven it, without realizing that absence of contradiction is not the same as proof? Think about your assumptions about people. If you only meet kind individuals, does that confirm that all people are kind? Or are you just trapped in a loop of selective evidence? If every relationship you've had has ended in heartbreak, does that prove love always fails? Or have you just not seen the exceptions? The paradox forces you to confront an uncomfortable truth. Sometimes evidence doesn't mean what you think it does. Sometimes logic itself twists in ways that feel absurd but remain undeniably valid. So, you sit there in the grass, the raven still staring at you, the red apple resting at your feet. You came here knowing one thing for certain: all ravens are black. Now, as you hold the apple in your hand, you feel the weight of something much heavier, the realization that logic, the very thing you trust to make sense of the world, is not as solid as you once believed. The Sleeping Beauty Paradox. You drift into unconsciousness, knowing that when you wake, you will have no memory of how many times you've been awakened before. A researcher stands over you, holding a simple, ordinary coin. If this coin lands on heads, they explain, we will wake you up once on Monday, and then the experiment will be over. But if it lands on tails, we will wake you up on Monday, and then again on Tuesday. However, between awakenings, We will put you back to sleep and erase your memory. Each time you wake, you won't know what day it is, and you won't know if you've been woken before. You nod, understanding the rules, and then you let yourself slip into the darkness of sleep. When your eyes open, you find yourself in a blank, windowless room. You don't know if it's Monday or Tuesday. You don't know if the coin landed on heads or tails. You only know one thing for certain: you have woken up. And then the real question hits you. What probability should you assign to the coin having landed on heads? At first it seems obvious. The coin was flipped fairly, 50-50, heads or tails. There's no reason to assume otherwise. But then your mind starts to unravel as you remember the conditions of the experiment. If the coin landed on heads, you are experiencing the only awakening of the experiment, Monday. But if the coin landed on tails, you could be in one of two awakenings, either Monday or Tuesday. The moment you wake up, you realize something disturbing. In terms of raw experiences, you are twice as likely to wake up if the coin landed on tails. In other words, for every one time you wake up under heads, you wake up twice under tails. This means that at any given moment of consciousness, the likelihood of being in a tails scenario should be twice as high as a heads scenario. Suddenly, the numbers flip. You are no longer in a simple 50-50 world. The probability of the coin having landed on heads isn't 50%, it's 1/3. And the probability of tails? 2/3. Your instincts scream against this conclusion. How can a fair coin not be 50-50? The paradox has torn reality in half, revealing a hidden layer of probability that defies common sense. And then, a darker thought creeps in. If your own memories and experiences can mislead you this easily, how much of your knowledge about the world is skewed by the way you experience it? You trust your perception, your sense of time, your memories, but what if they are just fragments of a larger picture you can never fully grasp? Maybe this paradox isn't just about Sleeping Beauty. Maybe it's about you. Think about your life. How many moments have you lived without realizing that your perception of reality is shaped by the structure of experience itself? How often do you assume things are fair and balanced, when in reality, unseen forces are tilting the odds without your knowledge? You sit there, wide awake, knowing that you might be experiencing Monday or Tuesday, heads or tails, and that you will never truly be sure which is which. The only thing you do know is this: probability isn't always about fairness. Sometimes it's about perspective, and in the end, Sleeping Beauty is not just a fairy tale. It's a trap, a perfect paradox that proves reality is not always as simple as it seems. Gabriel's horn. You stand before an impossible object, an elegant, spiraling shape that stretches endlessly into the distance. It is called Gabriel's horn, and at first glance, it seems ordinary enough. It looks like a trumpet, its mouth wide and open, narrowing down into an infinitely long, ever-shrinking tube. But then you hear the paradox. This horn, this smooth and perfect mathematical shape, has a finite volume, but an infinite surface area. Your mind seizes up. How can something that goes on forever hold only a limited amount of space inside? And how can a shape that could theoretically be filled with paint never be able to be painted on the outside? You try to break it down. Gabriel's horn is formed by taking a simple mathematical function, y equals 1, xy equals 1 over xy equals x1, and rotating it around an axis. The result is a trumpet-like shape that extends infinitely in one direction, forever narrowing, but never quite closing off. The horn has an entrance, a wide opening at one end, but the other end vanishes into infinity, always shrinking, always moving towards zero, but never reaching it. And here's where things stop making sense. If you calculate the volume inside the horn, how much space it actually holds, you discover something strange. The volume converges to a finite number. No matter how far the horn stretches into infinity, it never holds more than a specific amount of space. It is infinite in length, but still somehow containable. But then you turn your attention to the surface area, the paintable exterior of the horn, and this is where the paradox sharpens its blade. The calculation for surface area reveals that it is infinite. No matter how much paint you use, you will never be able to fully coat its surface. You could pour an entire ocean of paint onto it, and yet there would still be an unpainted part, stretching forever beyond your reach. So now you are trapped, a horn that can be filled but not covered, a shape that can be contained but never completed. And suddenly you realize that this isn't just about a mathematical oddity. This is about the disconnect between perception and reality, about the way infinity weaves itself into the very fabric of existence in ways that defy logic. Think about time. You live a finite life, just a handful of years, a small and definite number, and yet, within that life, the moments stretch endlessly. The conversations, the thoughts, the experiences, each moment giving birth to infinite possibilities. You can fit infinity inside the finite. Think about knowledge. No matter how much you learn, there is always more to know. The more you explore, the more you discover that the surface of understanding is infinite. You can hold knowledge in your mind, but you will never truly cover its entirety. Or think about human relationships. A single connection, a single moment of love or loss can stretch beyond its boundaries, shaping infinite future moments. You can hold something small, a memory, a feeling, and yet its impact can reach beyond time itself. Gabriel's horn is more than just a shape. It is a warning, a reminder that infinity lurks in places you least expect it, that some things in life can be contained but never truly grasped. And so you stand there, staring into the endless, narrowing tunnel of the horn, knowing that no matter how far you follow it, no matter how deeply you try to understand, you will never reach the end, because the end does not exist. Russell's Paradox. You are handed a list, an impossible list, one that shouldn't exist. It is labeled the list of all lists that do not contain themselves. At first, this seems harmless enough. Some lists are simple, like a grocery list. A grocery list does not contain itself. You won't find grocery list written among the eggs and bread. It belongs on this master list. But then, the question strikes you like a hammer. What about this master list itself? Does the list of all lists that do not contain themselves contain itself? Your mind stumbles, caught in a loop. If it does contain itself, then it shouldn't be on the list, because the only lists that belong here are those that do not contain themselves. But if it does not contain itself, then by definition, it should be included on the list. And now, logic collapses. This is Russell's paradox, and it does not allow escape. No matter how you twist it, no matter how you try to reason your way out, the contradiction remains. The list must contain itself if, and only if, it does not contain itself. Both answers destroy themselves. At first, this might seem like an abstract game of words, a problem for logicians to debate in ivory towers. But then you realize that this paradox doesn't just infect language. It infects the foundations of mathematics itself. Because what is a set if not a mathematical list? In the early 20th century, mathematicians were building a perfect, logical system, an airtight world where numbers, sets, and rules worked in harmony. But then Bertrand Russell asked this simple, devastating question: does the set of all sets that do not contain themselves contain itself? And like a crack spreading across glass, the entire system shattered. If contradictions like this could exist, then logic itself was broken. Every assumption about order, about categories, about certainty, suddenly unstable, And now, an even more unsettling realization creeps in. This paradox isn't just about mathematics. It is about self-reference. It is about systems that turn inward, about the contradictions that emerge when something tries to define itself. Have you ever tried to define yourself in a way that negates itself? I am humble. But the moment you declare humility, are you still truly humble? I never speak in absolutes, except you just did. I don't care what people think of me. But if that were true, why say it at all? The paradox haunts the human mind. You try to categorize, to fit yourself into neat definitions, but the moment you attempt to define who you are, the very act of self-definition begins to collapse under its own weight. And what about society? Laws that try to define what is and isn't lawful can sometimes contradict themselves. Governments that say they guarantee absolute freedom must also reserve the right to restrict it. A system that claims to allow all voices may have to silence those who threaten the system itself. Russell's paradox is not just a problem of mathematics. It is a mirror, a reflection of how the moment something tries to define itself, it risks unraveling. So you stand there, staring at the master list, knowing you cannot answer the question. The moment you say yes, it must be no. The moment you say no, it must be yes. And perhaps the most disturbing part? This isn't just a paradox of logic, it is a paradox of existence. You define yourself, the world defines itself, and somewhere, deep within those definitions, the contradiction is waiting. The Banach-Tarski Paradox. You hold a perfect, smooth sphere in your hands, solid, whole, unbreakable. It is a simple shape, familiar, comforting. But now, a mathematician approaches and makes an impossible claim. I can take this sphere, break it into pieces, and rearrange those pieces to form not one, but two spheres identical to the original. No shrinking, no stretching, no magic, just pure logic. You laugh. This must be a trick. How can you take one object, divide it, and end up with two copies of the same thing? If this were possible, you could create infinite matter, duplicate gold, break a loaf of bread, and feed the world forever. And yet, it is true. This is the Banach-Tarski Paradox, and it is one of the most unsettling ideas in all of mathematics. At first, you search for the flaw. Perhaps the pieces get smaller, crushed into dust. But no, the two spheres that emerge are exactly the same size as the original. Perhaps some mass is lost, sacrificed in the process. Nothing is removed, nothing is destroyed. The total volume is doubled, as if reality itself has been duplicated. And then the mathematician explains how it works, and your mind begins to tear at the seams. The trick lies not in physical breaking, but in the infinite complexity of space itself. The sphere is divided, not into normal pieces, but into infinitely intricate, unmeasurable fragments, pieces so bizarre that they defy normal geometry. These fragments are then rearranged using an eerie, counterintuitive property of infinity, where, under certain mathematical rules, something as small as a point can be transformed into something as vast as a sphere. It turns out that when infinity is involved, the normal rules of space break apart. The Banach-Tarski Paradox proves that, in pure mathematics, one can become two. And suddenly, you realize the implications are far more terrifying than just duplicating spheres. Because if a perfect finite object can be split into infinite paradoxical fragments and reconstructed into something larger, then what about the universe itself? Could space be composed of pieces that, if reconfigured, could yield more space? Could reality itself be infinitely replicable, its parts reshuffled in ways beyond human comprehension? And what about you? What if your identity, your mind, your consciousness is not a single, unbreakable whole, but something that could, in theory, be split and rearranged into two conscious beings? What if a perfect copy of you, made from the right combination of the right pieces, is not just possible, but mathematically inevitable? The paradox reveals a hidden truth. Infinity does not obey the laws of common sense. It operates under rules that bend logic, that challenge everything you believe about space, existence, and individuality. So you stare at the sphere in your hands, now understanding that it is no longer as solid, as finite, as it once seemed. You thought reality was indivisible. You thought one was always one, but now you know better. In the cold logic of infinity, one can always become two. The Hilbert Hotel Paradox. You arrive at a strange hotel in the dead of night, its towering structure stretching into infinity. The neon sign flickers. Hilbert's Hotel, always room for one more. Weary from travel, you step inside and approach the front desk. The receptionist, an elderly man with an unsettlingly precise smile, greets you. "I'd like a room," you say. "I'm afraid we are completely full," he replies. "Every room is occupied." Your heart sinks, until he adds with an almost mischievous grin, "But don't worry, we always have space." And with that, he picks up the phone and makes an announcement to the infinite guests staying in the infinite rooms. "Attention, please. All guests, kindly move to the next room. Guest in room 1, move to room 2. Guest in room 2, move to room 3. Guest in room 3, move to room 4, and so on. Thank you." A chain reaction unfolds, cascading down the endless hallways. Each guest moves one door down, pushing the occupancy further into infinity. Room 1 is now empty. "Here is your key," the receptionist says. You stand there, stunned. The hotel was full. Every single room had a guest. And yet, space was made for you, not by removing anyone, not by building more rooms, but simply by rearranging infinity itself. And then the true paradox begins. Moments later, a bus arrives. Not just any bus, a bus with infinite passengers. Every seat is filled with a tired traveler looking for a place to stay. You shake your head. This time, surely, the hotel cannot accommodate them. The receptionist barely reacts. He picks up the phone again. "Guests, please move to the room number that is double your current room number. Guest in room 1, move to room 2. Guest in room 2, move to room 4. Guest in room 3, move to room 6. Guest in room 4, move to room 8, and so on." Once again, an infinite shuffle unfolds, with every guest relocating to an even-numbered room, 2, 4, 6, 8, stretching forever. And now, every odd-numbered room is vacant. An infinite number of new guests can now check in. The impossible has happened. An infinite hotel, already full, has just made space for an infinite number of additional guests. This is Hilbert's Hotel Paradox, a mind-breaking thought experiment by mathematician David Hilbert, proving that infinity does not behave the way you think it should. Your instincts rebel. If something is full, it should not be able to accommodate more. But infinity mocks your instincts. It is a landscape where full does not mean filled, where there is always room for one more, or 1,000 more, or an infinite more. And then, the real horror sets in. What if the universe is an infinite hotel? What if time, existence, even consciousness follows this same unsettling logic? Could new moments, new realities be endlessly slotted in, even when everything seems full? What if your own mind, your sense of self, could be endlessly rearranged, memories pushed forward, new ones filling the gaps, stretching infinitely without you ever noticing? You turn back to the receptionist, suddenly unsure whether you should stay the night. He hands you the key with the same eerie smile. "Welcome to Hilbert's Hotel," he says. "We'll always have room for you, even if you never leave." The Monty Hall problem. You find yourself on a brightly lit stage, the audience cheering, the host, Monty Hall himself, grinning as he presents you with a choice. Before you are 3 doors. Behind one of them is a brand new car, gleaming and waiting to be yours. Behind the other 2, nothing but goats. Pick a door, Monty says, his voice smooth, practiced. You hesitate for a moment, then point to door 1. Monty nods but does not open it. Instead, he strides confidently to door 3 and swings it open. Behind it, a goat bleats softly. The audience gasps. Now, the real game begins. I'll give you a chance, Monty says. You can stick with your original choice, door 1, or switch to door 2. You freeze. The car is either behind door 1 or door 2. It seems like a 50-50 decision now, doesn't it? It shouldn't matter whether you switch or stay. But then, the doubt creeps in. Something about this doesn't feel right. And then the numbers hit you like a tidal wave. The Monty Hall problem isn't just a game. It's a paradox that exposes the flaws in human intuition. Because the truth is, the best choice is always to switch doors. And here's why. When you first chose door 1, you had a 1 in 3 chance of picking the car. That means there was a 2 in 3 chance that the car was actually behind one of the other 2 doors. Monty, knowing where the car is, deliberately removes one losing option. He always opens a door with a goat. That doesn't change the fact that when you first picked door 1, the car was more likely to be elsewhere. By eliminating a goat, Monty funnels the 2/3 probability onto the remaining unopened door. What seemed like a 50-50 gamble is actually a mathematically rigged situation in your favor, but only if you switch. If you stick with your original choice, your chance of winning remains 1/3. But if you switch, your chance jumps to 2/3. Twice as likely. But your brain rebels. It screams that there are only 2 doors left, that it must be 50-50. This is what makes the Monty Hall problem so infuriatingly deceptive. Your instincts lie to you. The numbers do not. This is the paradox of decision-making. You believe you are making a fair choice, but unseen forces, hidden probabilities, structured rules, are shaping the outcome. How many times in life have you trusted your gut, believing in an illusion of fairness, only to make the wrong choice? Think about gambling. Investors who hold instead of switching their strategy. People who stick with bad relationships, bad jobs, bad habits, not because they've truly considered the odds, but because they've emotionally committed to a past decision. The Monty Hall problem doesn't just reveal a trick in probability, it reveals a flaw in human reasoning. And now, here you are, standing on stage, Monty Hall still smiling, waiting for your answer. Do you trust your instinct, or do you trust the numbers? The audience holds its breath, and somewhere, behind one of those doors, the car waits. Proof that reality doesn't always work the way you think it should. Cantor's diagonal argument. You always thought infinity was just infinity, one vast, uncountable, limitless concept, something that goes on forever. But then, a mathematician named Georg Cantor arrives and shatters everything you thought you knew. Because Cantor proves something that feels impossible. Some infinities are bigger than others. At first, this makes no sense. Infinity should be the largest thing possible. How can one be greater than another? But then, Cantor shows you a simple, devastating argument. Imagine you have an infinite list of numbers, not just any numbers, decimal numbers between 0 and 1. You think, okay, that's infinite, but I can count them. Maybe you start listing them 0.123456, 0.987654, 0.456789, 0.314159, 0.271828. You assume that, just like counting whole numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, this list should be enough to include every possible decimal number between 0 and 1. After all, the list is infinite. How could anything be left out? Then Cantor smiles and shows you the flaw. He tells you to construct a new number, one that is not on the list. And he does this using a simple trick. 1. Take the first digit of the first number. Change it. 2. Take the second digit of the second number. Change it. 3. Take the third digit of the third number. Change it. 4. Keep doing this forever. By the end of this process, you have a new number, one that is different from every number on the list by at least one digit. It is missing. It cannot be on the list. And just like that, Cantor has proven the impossible. Even in an infinite list, there are numbers missing. There are more real numbers between 0 and 1 than there are whole numbers in the entire universe. This is Cantor's diagonal argument, and it reveals that some infinities are bigger than others. The infinity of countable numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, is smaller than the infinity of real numbers, which cannot be listed in any systematic way. And now, infinity is no longer one thing. It is a hierarchy, an endless landscape where some infinities stretch far beyond others. Your mind reels. Because this paradox isn't just about numbers. It is about the nature of reality itself. What else do you think is infinite but actually isn't? What if the universe, vast as it seems, is only a countable infinity, while somewhere, beyond what we can perceive, lies a deeper, more unknowable form of existence? What if your thoughts, your choices, your possible futures, what if some of them exist in a space that is bigger than the infinity you can even comprehend? Cantor's diagonal argument doesn't just change how you think about numbers, it changes how you think about everything. Because if some infinities are bigger than others, then what else in the universe is beyond what your mind can ever truly grasp? The paradox of infinity. You stand at the edge of eternity, staring into the endless abyss of numbers stretching beyond comprehension. Infinity, it should be absolute, untouchable, a vast, unchanging concept. But then, a simple question shakes the foundation of everything. What happens when you subtract infinity from infinity? Your instincts tell you the answer should be 0. After all, if you take something away from itself, nothing remains. But infinity does not obey your instincts. It is not a number. It is a wild, untamed beast that bends logic in ways that feel impossible. So you try a simple test. Imagine an infinite set of numbers. 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Infinity. Now subtract an infinite subset from it. Say, all the even numbers. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, infinity. What remains? 1, 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11. Infinity. Infinity is still there. You have just subtracted infinity from infinity, and infinity remained. Now you try again, but this time you remove all numbers except the first 101, 2, 3, 100. What remains? A finite set. The original infinity is gone. Now the result is just 100 numbers. And then you try a different approach. Subtract the infinite set from itself entirely. Remove all numbers. What remains? Nothing. 0. And suddenly you see the paradox. Infinity is not a fixed number. It is not something you can treat like a simple quantity. Depending on how you subtract it, infinity can leave you with 0, a finite number, or infinity itself. It is fluid, deceptive, an illusion of permanence that changes shape depending on the perspective from which you view it. And now, your mind spirals into even deeper questions. If infinity can be subtracted from itself and still remain, then what does it mean for the universe? If space is infinite, could an infinite number of galaxies vanish and still leave behind an infinite cosmos? What about time? If the past stretches infinitely behind you and the future stretches infinitely ahead, could whole eternities be subtracted without changing the fact that there is still an infinite amount of time left? And what about yourself? If every cell in your body is replaced over time, if memories fade and new ones take their place, if everything that makes you you is constantly in flux, are you still infinite in some way? Or are you just a shifting illusion, forever subtracting parts of yourself and still somehow remaining whole? Infinity is not a number. It is a paradox, a shape without form, a concept that cannot be contained. And as you stand at the edge of eternity, staring into its depths, you realize the terrifying truth. Even if you subtract infinity from infinity, the infinite still remains. The lottery paradox. You hold a lottery ticket in your hand, the numbers printed in bold ink. The grand prize is astronomical, life-changing, but deep down, you already know the truth. You are not going to win. It's a simple, rational belief. The odds are stacked against you, maybe 1 in a million or 1 in 100 million. You've seen the statistics. You understand probability. You accept that your ticket, like almost all others, will amount to nothing. But then a strange thought creeps in. If you extend this same reasoning, you should also believe that every ticket won't win. After all, each individual ticket has the same astronomically low chance. It is rational to assume that any given ticket is a loser. But here's the problem. Someone will win. You are now trapped in the lottery paradox, a devastating contradiction that emerges when perfectly reasonable beliefs lead to an obviously irrational conclusion. Because if you logically conclude that every ticket is a loser, then you must also conclude that the lottery itself will have no winner. But that is false. Someone always wins. The paradox is simple but brutal. It is rational to believe that any individual ticket will lose, but it is irrational to believe that no ticket will win. Your own logic destroys itself, and suddenly, this is no longer about lotteries. This paradox seeps into everything: science, law, human belief itself. Consider a courtroom. A jury is presented with overwhelming evidence that the accused is guilty, but the judge reminds them that each individual piece of evidence has a small probability of being wrong. The forensic report may be flawed. The witness may be mistaken. The confession may be coerced. If the jury treats each piece of evidence separately, doubting each one by itself, they may conclude that there is always a reasonable doubt. And yet, taken together, the evidence clearly points to guilt. Or think about history. Every historical record could, in theory, be inaccurate. Every eyewitness from the past could have lied, misremembered, or distorted the truth. If you examine each piece of history in isolation, you might rationally conclude that each account is unreliable. But if you apply this reasoning universally, you end up in a world where no history is true, no knowledge is reliable, and nothing can be believed. And now, the paradox turns inward. Think about your own life, your beliefs, your fears. Every day, you make decisions based on imperfect reasoning. You tell yourself that your efforts won't make a difference, that small actions are meaningless. One workout won't change my body. One kind act won't fix the world. One attempt at success won't matter. But when you apply this logic universally, you fall into a trap. Because even if each individual effort seems meaningless, someone wins the lottery. Someone's action, someone's decision, someone's belief makes all the difference. The lottery paradox exposes a flaw in how you perceive reality. It forces you to confront a disturbing truth. Sometimes, even rational thinking can lead you astray. So you stand there, holding your ticket, torn between logic and reality. You still believe it won't win. And yet, somewhere out there, in this very same lottery, someone is about to prove you wrong. The friendship paradox. You scroll through social media, watching your friends post photos from parties, vacations, and gatherings, always surrounded by people, always connected. Meanwhile, you sit alone, staring at your phone, wondering, why does everyone seem to have more friends than I do? It feels unfair, maybe even personal, like you're somehow missing out. But then you discover a strange, unsettling truth. It's not just in your head. Statistically speaking, most people actually do have fewer friends than their friends do on average. This is the friendship paradox, and it is a cruel trick of mathematics that makes you feel lonelier than you really are. At first, it seems impossible. How can most people have fewer friends than their own friends? Shouldn't friendship be evenly distributed? Shouldn't the average number of friends be, well, average? But the numbers don't lie. Imagine a small social network. Some people have only a few friends, while others are highly connected, like social hubs. The popular people, the ones with dozens, maybe hundreds of connections, appear in more social circles, meaning more people count them as friends. So when you compare yourself to your friends, you are more likely to be comparing yourself to someone more popular than you. The math behind it is brutal. People with many friends appear in more people's social circles. People with fewer friends appear in fewer circles. So on average, when you look at your friends, you are statistically biased towards seeing the more connected individuals. The result? Most people feel like they are less connected than those around them. And this paradox doesn't just live in numbers. It seeps into your perception of reality itself. Think about success. It seems like everyone around you is achieving more, reaching milestones while you struggle. But just like friendships, success is not evenly distributed. You are more likely to notice the highly visible, highly connected individuals who are always achieving something. Think about happiness. On social media, it looks like everyone is having the time of their lives, but you're only seeing the curated highlights from the most socially active people. You don't see the quiet loneliness behind the screens, the moments they don't share. Think about opportunities. It feels like others always seem to have an advantage. Better jobs, more invitations, more recognition. But again, these opportunities tend to cluster around the highly connected, the ones with the biggest networks. You see their lives more often, making it seem like your own is lacking. And now, an even darker realization settles in. If your entire perception of the world is shaped by this bias, then how many of your beliefs about yourself are completely distorted? The friendship paradox is a reminder that your perspective is not reality. You are trapped in a statistical illusion, mistaking a biased sample for the truth. So the next time you feel like you're falling behind, like everyone else is more connected, more successful, more anything, remember the paradox. It was never you that was lacking. It was always the illusion making you believe it. The two-envelope paradox. You sit at a table, staring at two identical envelopes. You know only one thing. One envelope contains twice as much money as the other. You have already chosen one, but before you open it, the host gives you a simple offer. Would you like to switch envelopes? You hesitate. There's no reason to switch, right? After all, you picked at random. The other envelope is just as likely to contain half as much as it is to contain twice as much. But then, something strange happens. You decide to calculate your expected gain if you switch. Let's say your envelope contains X dollars. That means the other envelope must contain either 2x or x divided by 2. Since you don't know which, you assign equal probability, 50%, to each case. Your expected value if you switch is 12 plus 2, x plus 12x squared equals x plus x to the fourth power equals 5x to the fourth power plus 1/2 times 2x equals x plus 1/2 x to the fourth power equals 5x to the fourth power over 4, 2x plus 21, 2x equals x plus 4, x equals 45, x. Wait, 5x divided by 4? That means your expected amount after switching is 25% higher than if you stay. But how? The problem was symmetric. The envelopes were identical. How could switching be the better move when you could have picked either envelope to begin with? Your brain glitches. This shouldn't be possible. And yet, by this logic, you should always switch. But if you always switch, then your decision never ends. No matter which envelope you hold, you should always trade it for the other. This is the two-envelope paradox, and it exposes a flaw in reasoning so subtle that even seasoned mathematicians fall into its trap. Where does the logic break? The trick is hidden in how you set up the probabilities. You assumed that each envelope had an equal 50% chance of containing twice or half the amount, but that assumption ignores a crucial fact. Once you have picked an envelope, the total amount of money in play is already fixed. The other envelope doesn't have an independent 50-50 relationship to yours. It has a fixed relationship based on what's actually inside. You are treating an absolute value like a random one. This is where the paradox devours itself. It feels like switching is always beneficial, but it cannot be, because if both players in the game switched, nothing would change. The paradox tricks you into seeing a mathematical gain where there is none. And now, the implications sink in. How many times in life have you thought switching to something else, another job, another relationship, another opportunity, was guaranteed to improve your situation, simply because it seemed like a better deal? How often have you been caught in an infinite loop of second-guessing, where no choice ever feels final? The two-envelope paradox isn't just a mathematical illusion. It is a psychological trap, a reminder that sometimes the desire to optimize never ends. You glance down at the envelope in your hands. Should you switch? The paradox whispers, yes, always. But deep down, you know the truth. Sometimes the smartest move is to stop playing the game. Schrödinger's cat. You are standing before a sealed box. Inside, unseen, is a cat. But this is no ordinary cat. It exists in a quantum nightmare, trapped between life and death in a way that defies all logic. You hesitate before opening the box because you know the rules of the experiment. Inside the box, there is a radioactive atom, an unpredictable quantum system. If the atom decays, it triggers a mechanism that shatters a vial of poison, killing the cat. If the atom does not decay, the cat remains alive. But here's where everything collapses into paradox. Quantum mechanics states that until you observe the atom, it exists in a superposition, both decayed and not decayed, both triggering and not triggering the poison. And since the cat's life depends on this event, it too is in superposition, both dead and alive at the same time. Your instincts scream against this. A cat cannot be both dead and alive. Something either happens or it doesn't. But in the bizarre world of quantum physics, reality does not behave the way you expect. This is Schrödinger's cat paradox, a mind-breaking thought experiment created by physicist Erwin Schrödinger to expose the absurd implications of quantum theory. The paradox is simple. If the cat were a normal object, you could say it is either dead or alive, even if you don't know which. But quantum mechanics tells you that until you open the box, the cat is both dead and alive simultaneously. It exists in a limbo of probability, a fusion of two opposing states. Only when you observe it does reality choose. The wave of possibility collapses, and the cat is either dead or alive. But before that moment, it is trapped in both worlds. And now, an unsettling realization creeps in. What if this paradox isn't just about a cat? What if your entire reality works this way? If observation determines reality, then what about the choices you haven't made yet? If you don't check the results of a test, do you still both pass and fail? If you don't open an unread message, does it exist in two states, both good news and bad news? And what about you? Are you just one version of yourself, or are you an ever-branching set of possibilities, collapsing into a single outcome only when a choice is made? What if the future is not yet real, existing instead as a tangled mess of probabilities waiting to resolve? Schrödinger's cat doesn't just challenge science, it challenges your very perception of reality. It suggests that things don't exist in a fixed state until you observe them, that possibilities are real until choice makes them otherwise. You stare at the box, knowing that the act of looking will change what's inside. The cat is both alive and dead, waiting to become one or the other. And now you understand the true horror of the paradox. You are not just the observer, you are the cat, the twin paradox. You and your twin stand side by side, identical in every way. But then, a challenge is set before you. One of you will board a spaceship traveling at near the speed of light, while the other stays behind on Earth. You shake hands, say your goodbyes, and the ship launches into the void. Decades pass. When the traveler finally returns, they step out of the spaceship, and everything has changed. The twin who stayed on Earth is now old, wrinkled, and gray, but the traveler, they are barely older than when they left, a youthful shadow of the sibling they once knew. Two twins, once the same age, now separated by time itself. This is the twin paradox, a mind-breaking consequence of Einstein's theory of relativity. It reveals that time is not a universal constant. It flows differently depending on speed and gravity. But how does it work? The traveler, moving at near light speed, experiences time dilation. The faster you move through space, the slower you move through time. To them, only a few years have passed on the spaceship, but back on Earth, decades have rolled by. This effect is not science fiction. It is real. GPS satellites, orbiting Earth at high speeds, tick at a slightly different rate than clocks on the ground. Astronauts on the International Space Station age a fraction of a second slower than the rest of us. But here's the paradox. From the traveler's perspective, they are stationary, and Earth is the one moving away at near light speed. Shouldn't that mean the twin on Earth ages slower instead? It seems like a contradiction. Both should see the other aging slower. But there is an answer hidden in relativity. The twin on the spaceship experiences something the Earthbound twin does not, a period of acceleration and deceleration. The moment they turn the ship around to return home, they are no longer in an inertial frame of reference. This acceleration breaks the symmetry, shifting time in a way that allows the paradox to resolve. And now you realize the deeper implications. If time itself is not absolute, then what does that mean for reality? What if every moment you experience is just one version of time, unique to your perspective, never truly shared with anyone else? What if your past and future are not fixed, but instead fluid, bending depending on how and where you exist in the universe? The paradox is not just about twins, it is about the nature of time itself. It suggests that time is not an unshakable river, flowing evenly for all. It is a vast ocean, warping, twisting, stretching differently for every traveler. And if time is relative, are you even experiencing the same reality as the person next to you? Your twin stares at you, wrinkles etched into their skin, years stolen by time. To them, your journey lasted a lifetime. To you, it was only a blink, and in that moment, you understand. Time does not wait. It bends. It tricks. It is never what you think it is. The Fermi Paradox. You stand beneath a sky littered with stars, each one a potential sun, each sun a potential home. The universe is vast beyond comprehension, stretching for 93 billion light years, filled with billions of galaxies, each containing billions of stars, each with planets orbiting in quiet procession. Logic tells you that life should be everywhere, With so many chances, so many Earth-like planets, it seems inevitable that intelligent civilizations must have risen across the cosmos. And yet, silence. No messages, no signals, no evidence of extraterrestrial cities glowing in the dark, not a single undeniable trace that we are not alone. This is the Fermi Paradox, and it forces you to confront an unsettling contradiction. The universe is unimaginably big, old, and full of planets, but we see no undeniable evidence of alien life. So, where is everybody? The question first emerged from physicist Enrico Fermi in 1950. He looked at the sky, did some quick math, and realized that if even a fraction of civilizations developed advanced technology, they should have colonized the galaxy by now. The numbers say the stars should be teeming with life, but our telescopes, our satellites, our radio signals, they all return silence. So now you are left to wonder, why? Perhaps alien life never made it past the microbial stage. Maybe life itself is so rare, so fragile, that Earth is a miraculous exception, a lonely island in a cosmic desert. Or maybe civilizations destroy themselves before they can reach the stars. Nuclear war, ecological collapse, artificial intelligence run amok. What if every intelligent species is doomed to self-destruction before it ever gets the chance to spread? Or worse, what if someone or something is out there watching, and the silence is not an accident, but a warning? And then an even more terrifying thought grips you. What if we are not hearing them because they already heard us? What if broadcasting our presence to the universe, sending radio waves, probes, and messages is not an act of discovery, but an invitation to something we do not understand? What if there are things in the dark, listening, waiting? Or maybe the answer is even simpler. Maybe they are here, but in a way we cannot recognize. Maybe intelligence is so different, so beyond our understanding, that we wouldn't even know if we had already encountered it. A hyper-advanced AI civilization, self-replicating probes hidden in the corners of space, beings that do not communicate in ways we can detect. The Fermi Paradox is not just a question of astronomy. It is a question of our place in the universe. Are we alone, a miracle in the void? Or are we surrounded by life that is simply too quiet, too dangerous, or too advanced for us to comprehend? You look up at the stars, feeling smaller than ever, and for the first time, the silence does not feel empty. It feels like an answer waiting to be understood. Olbers Paradox. You step outside on a clear night and look up. The sky is dark, scattered with stars, faint glows stretched across an ocean of blackness. It feels natural. This is how the night is supposed to be. But then, a question creeps in, one so simple that it should have an obvious answer. If the universe contains an infinite number of stars, why isn't the sky completely bright? Think about it. If the cosmos is endless, filled with infinite stars stretching in every direction, then no matter where you look, your gaze should eventually land on a star. Every patch of sky should be glowing. The night should be as bright as day, yet it isn't. The darkness remains. This contradiction is Olbers' paradox, and it exposes a fundamental flaw in how we once understood the universe. For centuries, astronomers struggled with the question, if space is infinite and filled with stars, shouldn't their combined light add up to an overwhelming radiance, drowning the night in eternal daylight? At first, people searched for simple explanations. Maybe dust in space absorbs the light, but that wouldn't work. The dust itself would eventually heat up and start glowing, still turning the sky bright. Then the real answer emerged, and it changed everything. The universe is not static, it is expanding. And because of this, distant light is stretched, redshifted, its wavelengths stretched longer and longer until they become invisible to the human eye. What should be a bright sky is instead a dark and silent void, as the light from ancient stars fades beyond our reach. But there's something even more profound hidden in the darkness. The paradox reveals that the universe is not infinite in time. If the cosmos had always existed, if stars had been burning forever, the sky would be blinding. But it isn't, because the universe had a beginning. The night is dark because there was once nothing. The light from countless stars simply hasn't had enough time to reach us. The universe is still young on a cosmic scale. The darkness you see above is not empty. It is filled with the echo of a past that hasn't yet arrived. And now, as you stare into the abyss, you realize that the night sky is not simply black. It is waiting. Every distant galaxy, every star that has yet to send its light across the void, every unseen moment stretching beyond time itself, all of it is on its way, racing toward you at the speed of light. You stand there, feeling the weight of an answer that is both beautiful and terrifying. The sky is dark, not because the stars are missing, but because the story of the universe is still unfolding. Maxwell's demon. You are staring at a closed box divided into two chambers. Inside, an invisible war is being waged, not with weapons, but with heat. On one side, molecules are moving frantically, bouncing off the walls with high energy. On the other side, molecules move lazily, drifting with low energy. The temperatures are starting to even out. Then, a tiny demon appears. Not a literal demon, of course. This is a thought experiment, but the implications are just as unsettling. The demon watches the molecules with impossible precision. Every time a fast, high-energy molecule approaches the dividing wall, the demon opens a tiny door and lets it through to one side. When a slow, low-energy molecule approaches, it sends it the other way. Over time, something bizarre happens. One side of the box gets hotter, filled with fast-moving molecules. The other side gets colder, filled with slow-moving molecules. The demon has reversed entropy. It has separated hot from cold without doing any work, seemingly breaking the second law of thermodynamics, one of the fundamental laws of physics that states entropy, disorder, must always increase. You are now face to face with Maxwell's demon, a paradox proposed by physicist James Clerk Maxwell. The second law of thermodynamics is supposed to be absolute. Heat moves from hot to cold. Disorder increases. Over time, the universe drifts toward chaos. But this tiny demon, simply by sorting molecules, has managed to create order out of disorder. It has made one side of the box hotter and the other colder without using energy. This should be impossible, because if such a demon existed, you could build a perpetual motion machine, an engine that runs forever, generating infinite energy from nothing. This would overthrow everything we know about physics. But something is wrong. There must be a hidden cost. Scientists searched for the flaw in the logic, and then they found it. The demon itself must observe every molecule. It must keep a record of their speeds, their directions, their exact states, and in doing so, it must store information. And storing information is not free. To track molecules, the demon must have a memory, and eventually, to keep working, it must erase old information to make room for new data. And erasing information releases heat. In fact, the energy cost of memory erasure turns out to exactly cancel out the energy the demon seemingly saved. The universe always wins. The second law of thermodynamics remains unbroken. But the implications of Maxwell's demon go far beyond just heat. It suggests that information and energy are deeply linked, that knowledge itself has a physical cost. Every time you learn something, store something, erase something, your brain, like the demon, must burn energy to do so. And now, a darker question arises. If information and entropy are connected, what does that mean for the universe itself? What if reality is not just matter and energy, but information? What if the fabric of existence is governed not just by physical laws, but by the way information is stored, processed, and erased? And what does that say about you? Your memories, your thoughts, your mind. They are patterns of information arranged within the physical structure of your brain. If entropy must always increase, does that mean over time all knowledge must decay? Does that mean that even reality itself must eventually forget? You stare at the tiny, invisible demon, watching it work. It is not just sorting molecules. It is playing with the very foundations of existence. And for the first time, you realize that the greatest paradox of all is not about heat or physics or energy. It is about whether the universe itself is simply an endless computation, one where, in the end, the ultimate cost is to forget everything that ever was. The Mpemba Effect. You place two identical containers in the freezer, one filled with hot water, the other with cold water. Logic tells you that the colder one should freeze first. After all, it's already closer to the freezing point. But then, something impossible happens. The hot water freezes faster. You check the conditions, you repeat the experiment. Again, the hotter water seems to reach solid ice before the colder one. The paradox is undeniable. This is the Mpemba Effect, a baffling observation named after Erasto Mpemba, a Tanzanian student who, in 1963, noticed this strange phenomenon while making ice cream. He was ridiculed for it until scientists confirmed that it actually happens. But why? For centuries, no one could fully explain it. Even Aristotle, centuries before modern science, noticed that heated water sometimes seemed to freeze more quickly. But how could that be? If cold water is already closer to freezing, how could heat be an advantage? Theories flooded in, each revealing another layer of complexity hidden beneath the surface. Maybe it's evaporation. Hot water loses more mass as steam, leaving less water to freeze. But the effect still happens in closed containers. Maybe it's convection currents. Hot water circulates more as it cools, creating uneven temperature zones that accelerate freezing. But that alone doesn't fully explain it. Maybe it's supercooling. Colder water can sometimes avoid freezing until suddenly snapping into ice, while hot water cools in a more predictable way. But why should supercooling be more common in one than the other? Or maybe the answer is even deeper, at the molecular level. Water isn't just a simple liquid. It has complex hydrogen bonds that create temporary structures. When heated, these structures are broken down, changing the way molecules interact as they cool. This means that hot water and cold water are not just different in temperature, they are different in structure, in the very way their molecules behave. And suddenly, you realize this isn't just about water. This paradox defies expectations in the same way many things in life do. It forces you to question the idea that progress is always linear, that the shortest path is always the best. Because sometimes, starting from a higher energy state can get you to the goal faster. Think about personal growth. Sometimes the hardest struggles, the emotional heat, the failures, the chaos, lead to clarity and transformation faster than slow, careful steps. Think about knowledge. Sometimes unlearning wrong ideas is the fastest way to wisdom. You don't start fresh, you start with intensity, break down old patterns, and arrive at understanding sooner. Think about success. Sometimes momentum matters more than starting position. The one who begins with intensity, drive, and movement may overtake the one who started carefully, cautiously, at rest. The Mpemba Effect is not just about freezing water. It is about how speed, heat, energy, and transformation work in ways we don't fully understand. And perhaps the most unsettling thought of all? If something as simple as water still holds mysteries that defy logic, how much of the universe is still laughing at what we think we know? The Information Paradox. You watch as a doomed astronaut drifts toward the event horizon of a black hole, the point of no return where gravity becomes so extreme that nothing, not even light, can escape. The moment they cross the threshold, they are gone, swallowed, erased. Or are they? Because now you are faced with a paradox so unsettling that it threatens to break the laws of physics themselves. What happens to the information about what fell in? This is the information paradox, and it challenges the very foundation of reality. In everyday life, information is never truly lost. If you burn a book, the pages are gone, but the ashes, smoke, and heat still contain traces of the original information. If you had a powerful enough system, you could, in theory, reconstruct the book from its remnants. But a black hole doesn't work like that. According to Einstein's general relativity, anything that falls in is crushed into a singularity, a point of infinite density. No trace, no way to retrieve what was lost. The information about what fell in, whether it was a spaceship, a star, or even just a single atom, should be erased from the universe. And yet, quantum mechanics says this is impossible. One of the fundamental rules of quantum physics is that information can never be truly lost. Every particle, every interaction, every event leaves an imprint, something that can, in principle, be traced back. The universe does not delete history, but a black hole seems to do exactly that. This creates a horrifying contradiction. General relativity says information is lost forever in the singularity. Quantum mechanics says information can never be lost. Both cannot be true. One of them must be wrong. And now, physicists are at war with reality itself, searching for a resolution to this paradox. Some believe information is somehow stored on the event horizon, a cosmic recording etched into the very surface of the black hole. When the black hole eventually evaporates through Hawking radiation, the information leaks back out in a scrambled, unrecognizable form. Others propose that black holes are not true erasers, but gateways, that information is not destroyed, but transported elsewhere, perhaps into a parallel universe, forever beyond our reach. And then, the most disturbing theory of all emerges. What if reality itself is a hologram? Some physicists suggest that the universe might work like a holographic projection, where three-dimensional reality is actually encoded on a lower dimensional surface. If true, this would mean that all the information in the universe, including inside black holes, exists on the outer edges of reality itself, never truly lost, just translated into a different form. And now you stare into the darkness of a black hole, realizing that it is not just a void, it is a crack in the fabric of physics, a place where the rules break down. What happens to the astronaut who fell in? Are they truly erased, or does some fragment of them still exist, smeared across the horizon of reality, waiting to be understood? The black hole does not answer, it only swallows, and yet, even in its silence, it holds a truth so profound that solving it may unravel the very nature of the universe itself. Wave-particle duality. You fire a single beam of light toward a barrier with two tiny slits, expecting it to behave like any ordinary particle. Like throwing pebbles at a wall, you imagine the light should pass through one slit or the other, forming two neat lines on the screen behind it. But when you look at the result, something impossible has happened. Instead of two lines, you see an interference pattern, a series of bright and dark bands, as if the light had spread out like a wave, passing through both slits at the same time and interfering with itself. Confused, you try again. This time, you set up a detector at the slits to see which path the light actually takes. The moment you measure it, the moment you try to observe what's happening, the interference pattern disappears. Now, the light behaves like a particle, traveling through one slit or the other, as you originally expected. You remove the detector, and the interference pattern returns, as if reality itself is reacting to being watched. This is wave-particle duality, one of the most baffling paradoxes in quantum physics. Light and, in fact, all fundamental particles seem to exist in two contradictory states at once. When not observed, light acts like a wave, spreading out, interfering with itself, existing in multiple places at once. When observed, light collapses into a particle, choosing a single path as if it had always been there. This shouldn't be possible. A thing cannot be two things at once, and yet every experiment confirms it. Whether light is a wave or a particle depends on whether you look. And then an even deeper question emerges. What does it mean to observe something? Does it require a human, a camera, a single photon bouncing off the experiment? If reality chooses only when measured, does that mean it remains in a blur of possibilities until then? What if the entire universe exists in a kind of superposition, a wave of probabilities, only collapsing when something conscious observes it? And now, your own existence begins to feel uncertain. If a photon's nature is not determined until it is measured, then how many of your own choices, your own possibilities, are in a quantum blur right now? What if the future itself is not set, not until it is observed? Wave-particle duality is not just about light, it is about the nature of existence itself. Because if something as fundamental as light does not have a single, fixed reality until it is seen, then what else in this universe is waiting for you to look before it becomes real? Quantum Zeno effect. You stand before a ticking clock, watching the seconds pass. Time moves forward, events unfold, and the world around you changes. This is how reality works. But then, quantum physics whispers something unsettling. What if simply watching something intently could stop it from changing at all? This is the quantum Zeno effect, a bizarre phenomenon where constantly observing a quantum system can freeze it in place, preventing it from evolving as it normally would. It sounds impossible. Everything in nature changes over time. A radioactive atom should decay. An unstable system should evolve. But in the quantum world, measurement is more than passive observation. It interferes with reality itself. To understand this, imagine a single atom poised to decay like a microscopic time bomb. According to quantum mechanics, its decay is not a fixed event, but a probability wave. It exists in a superposition of decayed and not decayed, and only when measured does it choose an outcome. Now, suppose you check on the atom constantly, not just once, but repeatedly, in rapid succession. Each time you look, the quantum system is forced to collapse into its current state before it can evolve into the next one. The result? The atom never decays. The system remains frozen in place, as if trapped by your constant gaze. Like a watched pot that truly never boils, the mere act of observation disrupts the natural flow of time at the quantum level. And now, a terrifying question arises. If reality itself can be halted by observation, what does that mean for you? Are there moments in your life, choices, events, possibilities, that remain frozen simply because you are too focused on them? What if overthinking a decision is the cognitive equivalent of the quantum Zeno effect, preventing you from ever acting? What if entire aspects of existence, relationships, careers, dreams, stall when observed too closely, needing a break from scrutiny to move forward? And then, an even deeper thought chills you. What if this isn't just about atoms? What if the universe itself is a quantum system, and reality unfolds only when it is not being watched? Could it be that consciousness, awareness itself, determines whether the world moves forward or stands still? The quantum Zeno effect reveals something unsettling. Sometimes the best way to let something change is to stop looking. The Bootstrap Paradox. You wake up one morning to find a mysterious book on your desk. Its pages are filled with intricate details about advanced physics, equations you don't yet understand, theories beyond anything you've ever seen. You spend years studying it, and over time, you become one of the greatest physicists in history. Then, decades later, you build a time machine, and in a moment of curiosity, or perhaps destiny, you take the book and send it back in time to your younger self. Now stop. Where did the book come from? You never wrote it. You never discovered the theories inside. You only learned them from the book that was given to you. This is the Bootstrap Paradox, and it exposes one of the most bizarre consequences of time travel. An object or piece of knowledge can exist without ever having been created. At no point did anyone actually invent the book. It was never written, never discovered. It simply exists in an infinite loop, passed between timelines with no true origin. And the paradox doesn't stop at books. A violin could be taken back in time and given to a young musician, who then grows up and crafts the same violin, completing the loop. A scientific discovery could be learned from the future, brought back, and introduced to history, meaning no one actually discovered it in the first place. Even a person could be caught in a bootstrap loop. What if someone were taken back in time and became their own ancestor? The paradox gets its name from the phrase, pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, an impossible act, just like an object or idea existing without an origin. And now, the deeper horror begins to set in. If time allows for self-contained loops, how much of history, how much of your reality might be the result of something that was never created at all? What if certain events, inventions, or even moments in your own life exist only because they were sent back to create themselves? And then the most chilling question of all, is our universe caught in its own bootstrap paradox? What if the fundamental laws of physics, the equations that govern everything, were not discovered, but simply passed forward, an infinite echo with no true beginning? What if existence itself is a loop? You stare at the book on your desk. You know how the story ends, and yet somehow it never began. The Mpemba Effect. You stare at the screen, following the instructions carefully. Black and white lines appear, flashing in rapid succession, then suddenly shifting to green and red patterns. You keep looking. Your mind absorbs the contrast, the colors, the shifting intensity of the images. Minutes pass. It seems harmless enough, just another optical illusion. Then you look away. Something is wrong. The world around you hasn't returned to normal. The walls, the text on your phone, even the edges of objects, they all have a faint tint that wasn't there before. White surfaces seem slightly greenish. Shadows carry a reddish glow, and no matter how hard you blink, how much you shake your head, the effect won't go away. Hours pass, then days, then weeks. Welcome to the Mpemba Effect, an optical illusion so powerful that a few minutes of exposure can rewire your brain for months. Unlike most illusions, which fade as soon as you stop looking, this one lingers, embedding itself deep within your visual system. It's not a trick of the eyes, it's a rewiring of your neurons. But how? Your brain, ever the efficient machine, tries to adapt to what it sees. When exposed to repeated patterns, especially ones with strong color contrast, your neurons start compensating, adjusting how they process color and light. But in the case of the Mpemba Effect, this adjustment doesn't fade. It locks in. Your visual system changes permanently, or at least for so long that it feels permanent. The strangest part? No one fully understands why it lasts so long. Some scientists believe it hijacks low-level visual processing, embedding itself into the neural pathways that normally deal with color and contrast detection. Others suspect it interferes with long-term memory, creating a learned response that refuses to reset. And now, an unsettling thought creeps in. If a simple visual pattern can reprogram your perception for months, what else is rewiring your brain without you realizing it? How many things, images, ideas, social media feeds, repeated phrases, are subtly altering the way you see the world? What if belief itself works the same way? What if exposure to an idea, true or false, can stain your mind permanently, making it impossible to see reality without a tint of distortion? And then the worst realization of all. The Mpemba Effect doesn't just work on vision, it works on you, on your memories, your fears, your thoughts. What you consume, what you repeat, what you allow into your mind, it shapes you in ways you may never fully undo. You blink. The illusion is still there. The colors haven't faded. And for the first time, you wonder, what else have you been looking at for too long? The Müller-Lyer Illusion. You stare at two simple lines side by side. They are the same length. You know they are the same length. You could measure them, trace them, break them down into exact mathematical values. But no matter how much logic tells you they are identical, your eyes tell a different story. One line looks longer than the other. This is the Müller-Lyer Illusion, one of the most enduring and unsettling paradoxes of perception. Created by Franz Karl Müller-Lyer in 1889, this illusion proves that what you see and what is real are not always the same. The trick is simple. One line has outward-facing arrows, greater than dash less than, while the other has inward-facing arrows, less than dash greater than. Even though both lines are identical, the one with outward-facing arrows appears longer. Why? Your brain, trained by years of interpreting the world in 3 dimensions, assumes that these lines represent depth, distance, and perspective. You have spent your entire life navigating hallways, corners, roads, and objects that shrink as they recede into the distance. Your visual system automatically applies those rules, even when it shouldn't. Your mind isn't seeing the world as it is. It's seeing it as it expects it to be. And now, a disturbing question emerges. If you can't trust your eyes on something as simple as 2 straight lines, what else in your life is an illusion? Think about the way you judge people, the assumptions you make based on first impressions, the way success, status, and power can make someone seem larger than life, when in reality, they are no different from anyone else. Think about fear. How often does your mind exaggerate the danger of a situation? How many times have you avoided taking a risk, convinced that failure is closer than it really is? Think about memories. You believe your past is a clear, accurate reflection of what happened. But what if it's just another illusion, subtly reshaped, distorted by time, emotion, and expectation? The Müller-Lyer illusion isn't just a trick of the eyes, it is a warning, a reminder that perception is not reality, that your mind is constantly filling in the gaps, reshaping the truth, bending what you see to fit what it expects. And now you stare at the lines again, your brain still insisting that one is longer than the other, even though you know the truth, even though you measured it yourself. And suddenly, a terrifying realization hits you. If your brain can deceive you so easily, how much of your reality is an illusion you've never questioned? The paradox of choice. You walk into an ice cream shop expecting a simple decision, but instead of the usual 5 or 6 flavors, you're greeted with 50. At first, it feels like paradise. More choices mean more freedom, right? You scan the menu. Salted caramel, matcha swirl, dark chocolate raspberry, bourbon pecan, flavors you've never even considered. And then something strange happens. You freeze. Instead of making the decision easier, the overwhelming number of choices makes it impossible. What if you pick the wrong one? What if cookies and cream is good, but pistachio would have been perfect? The longer you stand there, the more you doubt yourself. Eventually, you settle on something, but as you walk away, taking your first bite, you don't feel relief. You feel regret. Did I choose wrong? Instead of enjoying your decision, you are haunted by the weight of all the other possibilities you left behind. This is the paradox of choice, a devastating contradiction of modern life. More options should make us happier, but in reality, more options often make us anxious, indecisive, and less satisfied with whatever we choose. Psychologist Barry Schwartz first explored this paradox, revealing that too much choice doesn't just delay decision-making, it actively makes us less happy with the decisions we do make. Why? Because every choice has an opportunity cost. The more options we have, the more we fixate on what we didn't choose. Instead of focusing on what we gained, we obsess over what we lost, even if we made a perfectly good decision. And it doesn't just apply to ice cream, dating apps, job offers, streaming services, endless product reviews. Every area of life now bombards you with more options than the human brain was ever designed to handle. And now, something even more terrifying becomes clear. What if this paradox is the reason you feel stuck? What if you delay decisions, not because you don't know what you want, but because you've been conditioned to believe that there's always a better option waiting? What if you scroll endlessly through choices, through possibilities, through life itself, only to realize that the longer you wait to decide, the less satisfied you will ever be? The paradox of choice whispers an unsettling truth. Freedom doesn't come from infinite options. It comes from the ability to choose and be at peace with that choice. So you stare at your melting ice cream, realizing the true cost of indecision. And you take another bite, this time choosing to enjoy what's in front of you. The Catch-22 Paradox. You sit in front of your computer, scanning job postings. Every listing demands experience, even for entry-level positions. But you can't get experience without first getting a job. You are trapped. This is the Catch-22 Paradox, a cruel, circular contradiction where the requirements for solving a problem prevent you from solving it in the first place. The term comes from Joseph Heller's novel Catch-22, in which a World War II pilot wants to escape dangerous combat missions by claiming insanity. But there's a rule. If you willingly fly deadly missions, you must be insane. But if you try to avoid them, you are clearly sane enough to serve. So either way, you cannot escape the system. And this paradox is everywhere. You need money to invest, but you need investments to make money. You need connections to get opportunities, but you need opportunities to make connections. You need confidence to succeed, but success is what builds confidence. Society is built on invisible loops like this, rules that force you into a cycle where the solution always feels out of reach. And now, the deeper realization hits. What if this paradox isn't just external? What if your own mind creates catch-22s that keep you trapped? You want to start something new, but you tell yourself you need to feel ready first. But readiness only comes from starting. You want to trust yourself, but you're waiting for proof that you can. But self-trust is built by acting, not waiting. You want happiness, but you tell yourself you'll be happy once you achieve something. But happiness is what fuels achievement in the first place. And suddenly, you see the real trick of a catch-22. It convinces you that you have no options. But the truth? The only way to escape is to break the loop yourself. You stop waiting for permission. You stop needing conditions to be perfect. You stop believing that you need experience before you start, confidence before you act, or success before you feel worthy. Because the only way out of a catch-22 is to stop playing by its rules. The paradox of tolerance. You live in a society built on the values of free speech, open-mindedness, and respect for all beliefs. Tolerance is a virtue, a sign of progress. You believe people should be free to express their ideas, even those you disagree with. But then, something disturbing happens. A group emerges, one that does not believe in tolerance. They use the freedoms granted to them to spread intolerance, to silence others, to advocate for oppression. They demand the right to express their hatred, their bigotry, their calls for violence, and now you face a contradiction. Should a tolerant society tolerate intolerance? This is the paradox of tolerance, first introduced by philosopher Karl Popper in 1945. He warned that if a society becomes too tolerant, even of those who seek to destroy tolerance, then it risks its own downfall. Because here's the trap: if you tolerate everything, including intolerance, then intolerance grows. It spreads, it gains power, and eventually it destroys tolerance itself. But if you refuse to tolerate intolerance, then are you not being intolerant yourself? Where do you draw the line? This paradox plays out across history. Democracies that allowed extremists to rise unchecked collapsed into dictatorships. Nations that welcomed open debate found that those who hated debate exploited that freedom to silence others. And now, the paradox is everywhere, on social media, in politics, in the endless battle between free speech and hate speech. If we allow all voices without limit, what happens when some voices seek to erase the rights of others? So, what is the solution? Popper suggested that tolerance must have limits, that societies should remain open until a group threatens the very foundation of that openness. Once intolerance becomes a weapon, it is no longer just an idea. It is an attack on the very system that allows free expression. And suddenly you realize, this paradox is not just about society. It is about you. How much should you tolerate in your own life? When do you draw boundaries? When do you refuse to accept behaviors that erode your dignity, your peace, your values? The paradox of tolerance forces you to confront a hard truth. Tolerance is not passivity. To defend freedom, you must be willing to protect it, because if tolerance is extended to the intolerant without limits, then eventually, the only thing left standing will be intolerance itself. The self-reference paradox. You are reading a simple sentence, just 6 words. This statement is false. At first, it seems harmless, but the moment you try to make sense of it, something breaks in your mind. If the statement is true, then what it says must be correct. It must be false. But if it's false, then the statement must be wrong, which means it must be true. You are now trapped in an infinite loop. This is the self-reference paradox, a statement that collapses under its own weight, endlessly contradicting itself. It is the verbal equivalent of a snake eating its own tail, a thought devouring itself the moment you try to hold on to it. It seems like a simple word game, but this paradox shakes the foundation of logic itself. Because if logic is built on statements being either true or false, then what do we do with a statement that is both and neither at the same time? Mathematicians, logicians, and philosophers have wrestled with this paradox for centuries. It lurks inside Russell's paradox, which shattered the idea of a perfectly consistent mathematical system. It fueled Gödel's incompleteness theorems, proving that some truths will always lie beyond human logic. And now, you feel it creeping into reality itself. Think about consciousness. If you try to define yourself by saying, "I am not who I think I am," do you create a contradiction? Can you ever step outside your own mind to truly understand yourself? Think about society. A system built on rules must have a rule about what happens when rules contradict themselves. But what if that rule contradicts itself? Who decides? Who wins? Think about trust. If someone says, "I always lie," can you believe them? If a system claims to be completely fair, but has to enforce unfair rules to maintain fairness, is it still fair? The self-reference paradox isn't just a logical riddle. It is a crack in the nature of truth itself. And the more you stare at it, the more you realize not everything can be solved. Not everything can be pinned down. Some truths, some ideas, some questions loop endlessly, forever unresolved. You read the sentence again. This statement is false. And for the first time, you understand. Some paradoxes don't have answers. And maybe that's the answer. The infinite regress paradox. Everything has a cause. Every event, every action, every moment is the result of something that came before it. A tree grows because a seed was planted. A river flows because rain fell. A thought enters your mind because of a lifetime of experiences leading up to it. But now, ask yourself, where does it end? If everything requires a cause, then what caused the first cause? This is the infinite regress paradox, a logical riddle that traps you in an endless chain of causes and effects, stretching backward forever. You try to escape it. Maybe the universe had a first cause, a single, ultimate event that started it all. But then, the question shifts. What caused that first cause? If you say God, then what created God? If you say the Big Bang, then what existed before the Big Bang? If you say something must be uncaused, then why stop there? Why does the chain end at all? Every answer collapses into another question. This paradox has haunted philosophers, scientists, and theologians for centuries. Aristotle attempted to solve it by proposing the concept of an unmoved mover, a first cause that itself was not caused by anything else. Religious traditions echo this idea with the concept of an eternal creator. But what if there was no beginning at all? What if time itself is infinite, with no starting point? What if the very concept of a first cause is flawed, because beginnings and endings only exist inside time, and we are trying to apply them to something that lies beyond it? And now, the paradox begins to feel personal. What about your own thoughts, your own choices? Do you act because of free will, or because of an infinite chain of prior influences, your upbringing, your genetics, the circumstances of your birth? If every belief you hold is shaped by a cause before it, can you ever truly originate anything? Or are you just another link in an endless chain, stretching back beyond memory, beyond history, beyond time itself? The infinite regress paradox whispers something unsettling. You will never find the first cause, because the moment you think you've reached it, the question begins again. The observer's paradox. You step into a room filled with people deep in conversation. They speak naturally, unaware of your presence. Their words flow, their gestures are effortless, their laughter genuine. Then, you make yourself known. The moment they see you, everything changes. Voices become careful, postures stiffen, some people stop talking altogether, others overcompensate, trying to appear normal. But you can feel it. The authenticity is gone. Your mere presence has altered the very thing you were trying to observe. This is the observer's paradox, a strange and unavoidable truth. Observing something changes it. It appears everywhere. In linguistics, when researchers try to study how people naturally speak, they find that once people know they are being recorded, their speech patterns shift. In psychology, people act differently when they know they're being watched, whether in an experiment or just under social pressure. In sociology, when researchers study a group's behavior, their mere presence disrupts the natural order of the group. But the paradox doesn't stop with human behavior. It reaches into the very fabric of reality. In quantum mechanics, the famous double-slit experiment showed that light and matter behave differently when measured. Electrons act like waves when unobserved, spreading out in probabilities. But the moment you try to measure them, they choose a path, collapsing into particles. The act of watching forces reality to take a definite form. And now you begin to wonder, if simply observing something can change it, what does that say about you? How much of your own identity is shaped by the people watching you? How often do you act differently, more carefully, more deliberately, because you are aware of the invisible eyes of society? Are you ever truly yourself? Or are you simply the version of yourself that the world expects to see? The Olbers Paradox suggests something both profound and terrifying. There is no such thing as a truly objective reality. Everything, every action, every thought, every moment is changed by the fact that it is being seen. And now, you sit with this realization: if being watched changes reality, then what does that say about a universe that is always being observed? The paradox of nostalgia. You find yourself longing for the past. A song plays, a familiar scent lingers in the air, and suddenly you're transported back to simpler times, better times, times when life felt warmer, easier, more magical. But then, a strange thought creeps in. Was it really that good? You remember the laughter, the friendships, the golden summers. But what about the stress, the uncertainty, the moments of loneliness and frustration? Why does none of that feel as vivid? This is the paradox of nostalgia, the unsettling truth that we often feel nostalgic for a past that was never as perfect as we remember. Your brain is not a recording device. It is an editor, constantly reshaping the past, smoothing out the rough edges, cutting out the bad scenes, leaving only the highlights. Studies in memory psychology reveal that we don't recall events as they happened. We recall how they made us feel. And over time, the details fade, but the emotions remain. This is why the music of your youth seems better than today's music. The people from your past seem kinder, more real than those you meet now. Life itself seems like it once had a kind of magic that is missing today. But nostalgia is not just a feeling, it is a trick of the mind. You remember childhood as simple, but forget the frustration of being powerless. You remember old friendships as effortless, but forget the conflicts, the misunderstandings. You remember the world as kinder, but forget that every generation has felt this exact same illusion. The paradox is this: nostalgia makes us love a past that never truly existed, not as we remember it. And now, you begin to wonder, how much of your identity is built on memories that never happened the way you think? If the past feels better than the present, is it because the past was better, or because your mind has reshaped it to feel that way? And perhaps the most haunting question of all, if you're always longing for yesterday, are you missing out on the beauty of today? You stare at the old photographs, the familiar songs, the memories that feel like home, and for the first time you wonder, what if, years from now, you'll be nostalgic for this very moment? The Grandfather Paradox. You step into a time machine, heart pounding, hands shaking. The plan is simple: go back in time and prevent your grandfather from ever meeting your grandmother. If you succeed, your parent is never born. And if your parent is never born, then you are never born. And if you are never born, who went back in time to stop your grandfather? This is the Grandfather Paradox, one of the most mind-breaking contradictions in time travel. It exposes a fundamental problem. If the past can be changed, then the future that led you back to change it cannot exist. The moment you erase your grandfather's chance to have children, you erase yourself. But if you never existed, then how could you have traveled back in time to stop him in the first place? Reality collapses into an impossible loop. Some theories suggest that the universe prevents paradoxes. Something always interferes to stop you. Maybe the gun jams, or a stranger saves your grandfather, or you hesitate at the last moment. Time, in this view, defends itself. Others suggest a branching timeline. By changing the past, you create an alternate universe, one where you were never born, but the original timeline, where you exist, remains untouched. And then there's the most unsettling theory of all. What if the past is already set in stone? What if your actions in the past were always part of history? What if, by trying to prevent your grandfather from meeting your grandmother, you actually caused them to meet? What if you were never truly in control of time at all? And now, a darker question creeps in. If changing the past creates paradoxes, then what about the choices you make in the present? What if every decision is already locked in, leading to a future that cannot be rewritten? What if free will is just an illusion, and time, like a river, can never truly be diverted? You step out of the time machine, staring at your grandfather from across the street, and suddenly you realize, no matter what you do next, time has already decided the outcome. The Teletransportation Paradox. You step into a futuristic teleportation machine. The technician reassures you, this is perfectly safe. The machine will scan every atom of your body, store the information, and instantly recreate you at your destination, down to the last molecule. The original version of you will be disassembled, ensuring there's only one of you at any given time. A flash of light. You step out at the other end, feeling exactly the same. Same thoughts, same memories, same body. But then a horrifying thought hits you. Did you just die? This is the Teletransportation Paradox, a disturbing question about identity, consciousness, and what it means to be you. If every atom in your body was destroyed and rebuilt somewhere else, is that still you, or just a perfect copy? Imagine for a moment that the machine malfunctions and fails to destroy the original you. Now there are two of you, both identical, both claiming to be the real you. Who is right? And more importantly, if one version is destroyed, does that mean you died, or does life simply continue uninterrupted in the copy? This paradox exposes a terrifying possibility. You are not a fixed thing. Your body is always changing, cells constantly dying and regenerating. Your memories shift, your thoughts evolve. The version of you from 10 years ago is not the same as the one today. So why does continuity matter? And then a more unsettling realization creeps in. If teleportation destroys and recreates you, then what about sleep? Every night, your consciousness vanishes. You wake up feeling like the same person, but is that just another illusion? How do you know that you are truly the same person from one moment to the next? The Teletransportation Paradox forces you to confront the most unsettling question of all. Are you a single continuous self, or just an illusion of memory and matter recreating itself every second? You stare at the teleportation machine, hesitating before stepping in again. And for the first time, you wonder, will the person who steps out truly be me? The Ship of Theseus Paradox. A grand ship sails across the ocean, its wooden planks worn by time and waves. To keep it seaworthy, the crew replaces old planks with new ones, one by one. Eventually, every single piece of wood is replaced. Now, ask yourself, is it still the same ship? This is the Ship of Theseus Paradox, an ancient thought experiment about identity, change, and what it truly means for something to remain itself. If every part of the ship has been replaced, then what remains of the original? Can something be the same if none of its original pieces exist anymore? Now imagine something even stranger. Suppose someone collects all the old planks and reassembles them into a second ship. Which is the real Ship of Theseus? the one that was gradually rebuilt, or the one made from the original pieces? And now, the paradox hits closer to home. Your body replaces its cells constantly. Almost every atom in you has been swapped out over time. The body you had as a child no longer exists, yet you still call yourself you. Your mind evolves. Your thoughts, beliefs, and memories shift. The person you were 10 years ago is not the person you are today. So, if both your body and mind have changed, then what exactly makes you you? Is identity a matter of physical continuity, or is it simply the story you tell yourself? The Ship of Theseus. Paradox whispers an unsettling truth. Nothing stays the same, not ships, not bodies, not minds. And yet, we still believe in identity, in continuity, in something that holds it all together. Maybe you are not a collection of parts, but the process itself, the constant change, the journey, the unfolding of something that is never truly finished. You stare at the ship, watching the waves crash against it, and suddenly you wonder, if nothing ever stays the same, then what does it truly mean to exist at all?